Hello everybody and welcome to Notable Newport with a Difference. You find me here at home in my office, maintaining a good and socially isolated distance from people, but we thought we would bring you a bit of one of our projects to you at home. So if you don't know, we've been working with the Newport and Carisbrooke Community Council and the Shaping Newport project to bring a piece of street art to the middle of Newport based on some of the really interesting people who have a Newport connection. So the idea is that this work is going to go on show in Cockram's Yard. So anyone who doesn't know where Cockram's Yard is, it's the funny little ginnel that goes between Lloyd's Pharmacy and the multi-storey car park in Newport. You walk through the ginnel, you come out opposite Sports Direct looking towards the bus station. Usually a chap there playing his guitar. That's how most people know where it is. This is a picture of Cockram's Yard in the Victorian period. So the little ginnel that we walk through now is just here. And you can see this is the Conservative Club, but yes, obviously very different to the view that we know now. But the idea is that we will be bringing a beautiful piece of historic information and attractive artwork to this space, and this is where you come in. So the whole idea is this project is supposed to have been part of a community project, but we can't do community at the moment. Well, at least not in it. Let's all get together and paint this thing in the gallery, which is what we had originally envisaged. So our fantastic artists, Trudy Wilson and Joe Rigby, who both work for Independent Arts, came up with the idea that if I get on here and have a chat with you, we can ask you all to have an artistic response, that's what they call it, to the history, and you can send in your pictures, and then what we'll do is we'll combine all the images together using a fancy computer program, and then we will create one final image that will go onto the boards, which will incorporate everyone's little ideas. So I'm going to give you a bit of information about the people who we've decided are notable people from Newport, and you might want to draw a picture of the place that they lived in, perhaps research the kind of clothes that they would have worn, perhaps as a part of the story that you're really interested in and you want to draw that, so maybe you want to draw a piece of equipment that they might have used, or something that they invented, or a place where they lived. That's the idea. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you now to go through the people who we've chosen. Now the reason we've chosen these people is I did manage to get out and run about 7 or 8 sessions over the last few months where we talked about the people who we wanted to be involved, and we're going to stick with those people. So this is a little bit about them. I hope you enjoy it. And then if you want to send in your artistic responses, you can take a photograph of them, email it to us at info@independentarts.org.uk, or you can send it to us on Instagram. So we are at Independent Arts IOW, and use the hashtag Notable Newport. So we're really looking forward to seeing some of your fabulous pieces of art and including them in our project. So let's learn a little bit more about the people who we've chosen. So the first person we've chosen is a chap called Richard de Redvers. He inherited Carisbrooke Castle. His family turned it into the castle that we see today. So his son built the big keep that we all walk through, that big gate to go into the grounds. But the reason that we've chosen Richard de Redvers was not necessarily because of his work on Carisbrooke Castle, but because he basically made Newport look the way it does today. So he moved into the castle and he's like, oh, I need to get all my cool stuff that get imported, you know, the nice wine and the good food from the river up to the castle. So I need to build some roads. So what he did was he built the High Street, which goes from the river to the castle, Quay Street, which goes from the quay to the castle, and then Pile Street, which goes from the pile, or the Old English word for river crossing, up to the castle. So those 3 roads that basically we all walk down pretty much every day if you live and work in Newport were all put there by Richard de Redvers to get his nice goods all the way up to his new house. But because these 3 streets are so central, lots of the other smaller streets were built off that, so you end up with kind of a grid system. I don't know if anyone's noticed that we have that in Newport. Probably walk down it every day and don't think about it. But that means also that we ended up with the lovely squares that we now have with the Minster, and where we have the market, and I know there's lots of cool stuff that the Shaping Newport team are looking at to try and get us more involved in these public spaces. But those spaces that we use all the time, that we walk past when we get in our coffee at lunchtime, or going buying the kids' school shoes, all there because Richard de Redvers put them there to get his goods from the quay to the castle. Worth noting as well that actually the buildings obviously don't look the same, because Richard de Redvers was around in about 1100, and the French burned it down a couple of times since then. So yeah, obviously the buildings aren't the same, but the streets are the same. We'll go on a little bit more to talk about those French invaders in a few minutes. The next person on the list of notable Newportians, I don't think that's actually the right word, I should probably have learned it by now, notable people of Newport, is Isabella de Fortibus. There's been quite a lot of stuff going on around her quite recently. The Carisbrooke Castle team did quite a bit of work on her, so you might have seen some of that when you visited Carisbrooke. So Isabella de Fortibus inherited lands and the Isle of Wight. The whole island, it was owned by one person, and she turned Carisbrooke Castle from a military fortification into a comfortable home. So if you visit the castle today and you go into the Carisbrooke Castle Museum and you walk up the stairs, there's some very pretty stained glass windows. That used to be her chapel. Down in the basement would be where her court would have been, so she would have had feasts and celebrations there. But she also she was judge and jury, basically, so she would, if people had done something naughty in the Newport area, they would have been dragged in front of her, and she would have decided if they were guilty or not. But the reason that we've chosen her is that she's a really impressive, very strong woman. She was married at 13 and she had 6 children, and she lived longer than, she was a widow by the age of 25, and all her children died before her. So she was an exceedingly rich, very wealthy woman, but she was very well educated. She understood money and finances. She understood farming and goods and crops and what her land earned for her. She also understood the judicial system. So she was a pretty kick-ass lady, and she was chased by 2 separate kings who wanted to marry her, and numerous other chaps who thought, yes, we'll definitely give her she'd be a good lady to marry, we can take all the money, but no, she wasn't having any of it. In fact, she actually ran away from one of them, literally, went into hiding to avoid them. But the idea of having a strong, educated woman at this time, so she was around 1263, and so we thought she'd be really interesting. She's also great because she was the last owner of the Isle of Wight, so on her deathbed, the king, Edward I's, one of his men, came along and tried to get her to sign it over, but she refused to sign it over to anybody. And she insisted that they paid her for it, so they paid her 6,000 marks for the Isle of Wight. So she was the last person to own the island, and then after this point, the Isle of Wight became part of the Crown Lands, so part of England. So yes, we hope that you find her as interesting as we've done. Maybe a few things that you can think of for these people for artistic responses is maybe some of look at the grid system in Newport for Richard de Redvers. Costumes of 1100 for men, and obviously what would a medieval queen look like. Lots of ideas there to look at, and obviously Carisbrooke Castle focuses quite well in both those people's lives, so you might want to draw the castle, or maybe something abstract from a time that you visited there that reminds you of a great day out. So there's a few ideas for our first 2 notable people of Newport. Now on to our next notable person of Newport. So 1377, the French invaded the Isle of Wight. All the people of Newport ran away to Carisbrooke Castle to hide from the French. And the way that the country was protected back in the 1300s was there was basically a local militia. So usually a chap who had a manor house and then had some lands and had some men who worked for him and was well known and liked in the community would raise a group of people to fight against the enemy, whoever they may be. The chap who was in charge of the Isle of Wight militia was a man called Peter de Hayno, and he lived in Stenbury Manor, which is near God's Hill. And at the time of the French invasion, he and his men retreated to the castle. And the story goes that the castle was surrounded, and so, you know, there was no getting out. They thought that they were going to be stuck in there forever. And, you know, they've got the well there, as we all know, because the donkeys walk around. So they got water, but obviously food wasn't going to last forever. And there was lots of people inside the walls of the castle. So they knew they had to break out somehow. And Peter de Hayno apparently was an excellent bowman. And he had also been watching what the French troops did as they were outside the castle. And he noticed that every morning the French commander got up and he went round to all the troops who'd be in the encampment and tried to gee them up for the day ahead. And so Peter de Hayno decided that if he could execute the French commander, then the French would all go away. So he took his crossbow and he fired it out of one of those, well, the cross-shaped things in the walls of the castle. I'm sure there's a proper name for them. I can't remember what it is now. And then killed the French commander. Didn't quite work out as they expected, and the French didn't immediately run away, so they nipped outside and offered them a bribe of 1,000 marks if they would go away, and they did. So yes, that's Peter de Hayno, who chased the French out of Newport and off the Isle of Wight. To give an idea of what people may have looked like as soldiers in the 14th century, we have this fabulous picture here. As you can see, it's definitely a modern reenactment, but to give you an idea of the weaponry that they would have had, and of course Peter de Hayno wouldn't have had a longbow, he would have had a crossbow, so maybe that's an idea for some artistic inspiration. So who is the next person on our list? Ah, yes, George Brannon. Now, I don't have any pictures of George Brannon, but I do have a picture of some of the work that he did. So he was an artist and engraver, and he was very prolific in his work. He sketched and drew numerous beautiful beaches, coves and countryside on the Isle of Wight. He was alive between 1784 and 1860, and he created a book which was published in 1821 called Vectis Scenery. And this book was full of beautiful engravings. You can see this one, if I hold it up quite close to the camera, is Newport. So the next person that we come to is artist and engraver George Brannon. He published a book in 1821 called Vectis Scenery. So basically he had spent time going around lots of the beautiful places that we know and love on the Isle of Wight, and he had been sketching them and creating beautiful engravings. The book had lots of images in it, one of which is this, which, as you can see, is Newport. We've got the Guildhall here in the middle. This is where Accessorize used to be, and then the High Street where Halifax and, you know, Waterstones all run down this side of the street. So yeah, some beautiful images. But the thing about Vectis Scenery was it was a really big seller. And basically, it introduced the tourist trade to the Isle of Wight. So, you know, people had been coming here for a little while to take the waters and enjoy the fresh air. But this beautiful book of what you could see when you got here really ramped it up. So George Brannon basically brought tourism to the Isle of Wight. His sons then went on to set up the Isle of Wight County Press. So I think the family, the Brannon family with George at the head, probably did more to publicise the beauty and attractiveness of the Isle of Wight than anyone else. So we thought he was a really interesting person who doesn't get spoken about very often. So he had a spot in our notable Newport. who, I'm just going back to my notes now, can only remember so much. Right, the next person that we have is Professor John Milne. Now, many of you will say, well, he didn't come from Newport, and you're right, he didn't. He was born in Liverpool. And he became the Professor of Geology and Mining at the newly formed Imperial College of Engineering in Tokyo. But the reason he gets his notable Newport spot is when he finished his teaching work, he moved to the Isle of Wight and he made it his home. So John Milne is a very famous scientist, and he created machinery to measure earthquakes. So they're called seismometers. It's taken me 10 sessions to get that word right. He also basically was at the forefront of the study of seismology, which is a study of earthquakes. But he had lots of international dignitaries who would turn up to his house. He lived in a house called Shide Hill, which is down by National Tyres at the far end of Newport. Here's a picture of the man himself. Nice moustache. So he had people from all over the world, so, you know, from the Far East, from Russia, from America, who were all coming here to visit. He moved to the Isle of Wight in 1895, but as I say, people came to visit him from far and wide whilst he lived here. And he's actually buried in Newport. He died in 1913, and he's buried in the churchyard of St Paul's, Barton, which, of course, just up the road from the job centre. So if you want to pop into the churchyard on a walk, obviously keeping a responsible distance away from others, you'll be able to find his gravestone. Maybe that's something you might want to put in your art. Maybe you want to perhaps look a little bit more into seismometers and what they look like. There's an early picture of John Milne and his wife and a dignitary there with a seismometer. So yeah, I'm sure you can find some more information online to what they look like. Maybe you've even seen one, because there's still one of John Milne's seismometers up at Carisbrooke Castle. So maybe you saw it there on a trip in the past. So that's maybe something you want to concentrate on, or maybe the fact that he had a really interesting background and career, working across the world, working in Japan. So yeah, a few ideas about what you might want to paint or draw about John Milne. So the next lady on our list is Ellen Cantelo. She was one of the women who signed the very first petition for women's suffrage, which was put in front of the government in 1866 by John Stuart Mill. She lived on the Isle of Wight. Her father was a publican, and he ran the Eight Bells and the Castle Inn in the Newport area, so she was definitely from Newport. She signed the bill alongside her sister and a lady who we believe was her sister-in-law. Really impressive, actually, that there's families on the Isle of Wight who were so politically active. It turns out that actually her family was a part of the Chartists, so they were very politicised. But how on earth did they get hold of the petition on the Isle of Wight here in 1866? It's before mass rail transport was a big thing. So anyway, obviously very passionate about women's rights. She was an accomplished watercolourist, and she painted a lot of fantastic pictures of the Isle of Wight. Here is one. You may recognise Carisbrooke Church here in the background, but really beautiful piece from the archive at Carisbrooke Castle Museum. She moved to London to attempt to become a professional artist, which she did, but unfortunately, because she was a woman, she wasn't allowed to join the Royal Academy, so she became part of the Royal Society of Watercolourists, which was about as high up as you could get if you were a woman. She returned to the Isle of Wight later in her career, and she worked alongside a man called Mr. Brading, using photography to create picture postcards. So obviously quite early photography as well. She photographed Isle of Wight scenes, and yeah, they hopefully made a little bit of money. I have been told quite recently that occasionally you can find a Brading and Cantelo postcard that pops up sometimes at postcard auctions, so keep an eye out for those. She had a very full and successful career. In fact, she when she died in 1898, she had got £253, which she left to her sister. She never married, but she obviously had a very interesting life. So we thought, as an early suffragist campaigner and a highly talented artist who was sort of a woman before her time, she ought to be on the list. So maybe you would be thinking about drawing someone in fine Victorian costume or early cameras, or perhaps some of the scenes that she might have painted herself. So that's a few ideas for her. We have 2 left on our list now. The first one is this gentleman. Check him out. This is the Reverend Edgar Greenshield. You can see him here in his traditional Inuit dress. So Edgar Greenshield was the son of a Newport draper, and as a young man decided to devote his life to missionary work, and at the age of 20 he joined the Church Missionary Society College. So if you're going to go across the world and convert people, obviously you need to have a good sense of the of Christianity. So he studied theology, but alongside that, they also studied more practical skills. So he learned medical skills, and he also had technical skills, so they could build things and fix things. And he set sail in 1901 on his first mission to the Canadian Arctic, where it was pretty cold, miserable. Not a lot going on. He spent 2 years living on Blacklead Island. Now there's a place you need to Google. Literally nothing around it. It's now known as being, well, it was a whaling station, so basically people would go catch whales from there. Different times that back then, you know, all using whales for whale blubber for cosmetics and that kind of thing, which is why it was a big thing in the early 1900s. So while he was living on Blacklead Island, he also built their first hospital, and the first hospital in the Arctic region. And he learnt the Inuit language, and he got to know the people. He undertook numerous missions in that area, and in 1909 his ship sank after hitting an iceberg and 30 miles away from land, but thanks to his quick thinking, they rescued all the supplies and the crew and managed to survive 11 months before being rescued. Not how I would want to spend my time, that's for sure. So a very brave man. Edgar often returned to the island, and he became kind of a bit of a local celebrity because he would come along and do talks about, you know, the Arctic. And it was back in the time then when, of course, lots of people were starting to have Arctic expeditions. So I imagine he was very interesting to listen to. So he would come dressed in that outfit, in his Inuit outfit, and he brought a phonograph, so a record of the Inuit people talking, so people could hear the language. And he also brought some of the stuffed wildlife that could be found in those remote Arctic areas. So a very interesting chap. He continued as a missionary for the rest of his life, spending time in Ireland, the Shetlands, India, and then finally on Teesside. So yes, that is the Reverend Edgar Greenshield. So you might want to think about, maybe look a little bit more into Blacklead Island. Where is it on the map? Can you draw the map of it? What kind of animals might he have seen? Can you learn some Inuit language that we can put into a drawing? All very interesting stuff and ideas that you might want to think about as a creative response. Well, then we're on to our final person, and she is the youngest person that we've covered. This is 12-year-old Christabella Millgate. She is the youngest ever mayoress. Her father, John Millgate, was the mayor of Newport in 1911. The family also famous on the island for saving Newport Roman Villa. So yes, you may have heard the name before. So Christabella's mother had died, and so he asked if she would step into the shoes and be mayoress. So she was Lady Mayoress in 1911. It's an excellent quote here that says that it is recorded that she performs acceptably the duties of the position on all public occasions. So yes, let's hope we can all be just as acceptable as Christabella. Some of the things that she did was she presented prizes at the Newport County School. She opened the ladies branch of the Newport Literary Society, which is interesting for anyone at Independent Arts because that's actually the building where our offices are now. And she gave them a lovely clock to celebrate that. And she also helped to entertain the aged poor at the New Year's tea. So there we have our notable folk of Newport. We have Richard de Redvers, Isabella de Fortibus, Peter de Hayno, George Brannon, John Milne, Ellen Cantelo, the Reverend Edgar Greenshield and Christabella Millgate. So I look forward to you sending in all kinds of fantastic artistic responses to this afternoon's chat. Don't forget you can email them to, let me find my exciting bit of paper here, all very high tech. I'm not used to working from home. So yes, we have email us at info@independentarts.org.uk, Instagram us at independentartsIOW and use the hashtag NotableNewport. So we look forward to receiving your drawings, your paintings, your colouring. Maybe you want to build a sculpture in your garden. I don't know what, but send a picture of it and we look forward to making you part of this wonderful Notable Newport street art exhibition, which will be coming to Cockram's Yard sometime soon. Hopefully when they let us all back outside again, we'll have an amazing party. But I look forward to hearing from you. So a quick reminder, now you've heard everyone's stories, we hope that you've been inspired to colour something in, draw something yourself. Maybe you want to watercolour it, use pastels or paints, or create a sculpture in your garden, or take a photo somewhere. If you've been moved by one of the stories or intrigued by one of the stories, we'd love to see how it's inspired you to create a piece of art. It's open to everybody, so from 5 to 105 or even older or even younger. Get out your paper, your pens, your artistic materials and send us something fabulous. So a reminder of where to send it to. You can email it to info@independentarts.org.uk. You can pop it on Instagram. You will find us at independentartsIOW and use the hashtag NotableNewport. If you need these, you can look online at our website as well, which is www.independentarts.org.uk, and that will tell you how to get in touch with us. So we really look forward to seeing what wonderful pieces of art you can come up with around the theme of Notable Newport.